What a storm we had last night. Stone the crows. Thunder, lightning. I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning looking out of the bedroom window, which looks south, and over the channel, over the sea, a fantastic electrical storm. Thunder was shaking the house. Really amazing. The weather now is quite calm. This is the calm after the storm. It's normally before, isn't it? We've got 13 centigrade. Where are we? Hang on. 20 past 8 in the morning. 13 centigrade, which is 55 Fahrenheit. 95% humidity. 1,000 millibars on the barometer. So all is calm. That really was amazing. I do like a good electrical storm. The trouble is I've got all my amateur radio aerials, my ham radio aerials up in the air, wires up there everywhere. I have to disconnect them all and I ground them all because the static, even if it's not a direct hit, the static can build up on the aerials, the antennas, and then flash over here in my ham radio shack, which at the moment is my high-tech studio. Anyway, we've got an hour of talking rubbish ahead of us, and I've titled this one, or is it entitled? I think it's entitled, this one, Stories from the 1960s. A lot of you have asked about my workshop days. I have related various stories before, I know. But are there any other stories some of you are asking about the radio and TV workshop in the 60s? Anywhere else that I worked, or any stories I've got to tell about the old days? Just before I get on to that, thank you, Jordan, for the photograph of a transistor radio from the 1960s. It says on the front in big letters, 1970s, in big letters, Internet. Internet radio in the 70s. No, it's not internet as we know it, obviously. But Jordan, that must be unique. I reckon that's worth a fortune. I have never seen anything like it. Internet written on the front of this radio. Probably Japanese radio, isn't it? The Japanese made a lot of radios back then, because it's all Chinese now, isn't it? But that's amazing. Thank you, Jordan, for that. I shall stick a picture of that on the webpage, I think, for people to see. Thank you to Brent for your email, Brent. Excellent, from Winthrop, Washington. I was talking about pirate radio the other day, wasn't I? And you've said here that you've never had pirate stations, really, because there was never any need for it. There were so many stations to choose from. Of course, back in the day, well, even now, America being such a vast country, you've got so many AM and FM now, of course, stations. There was no need for anything else. We were stuck with the BBC Light programme, the third programme for classical, and the home service. That was it. At night we had Radio Luxembourg, which was a little bit iffy with interference and atmospherics. So we did have a need for something different. But of course in America you had so many AM stations. You say here, Brent, that there was one kind of illegal Wolfman Jack's radio station in America. And there's a link here to an article about it. Thank you for that. I haven't read the article yet. Wolfman Jack's radio station, I like that. The trouble is here in Worthing, we've had a couple of, as I've told you before, a couple of radio stations come on, pirate ones. One jammed the BBC, which is a stupid thing to do. The other one was on for, was it 2 or 3 years? And they finally got busted. I think people now, would-be pirates, are a little bit wary. They're wondering whether Ofcom is hanging around round the corner at the end of the road, waiting for them to fire up their transmitter. So people are keeping quiet. But they'll be back. Pirates will be back on the FM band, I'm sure, before long. Wolfman Jack's radio station's in Mexico, isn't it, Brent? I forgot that. I didn't misread it. I forgot it. I do forget things, getting older. Thanks for all your emails. rants@protonmail.com. Look forward to hearing from you, and as always, I do try to answer them all. Bob, nice to hear from you. You liked last Sunday's episode. Bob's thought of an alternative title, because he says here he wants more Tricia and Diane. So his title is Ray and His Flock of Birds. That's my wife and my sister-in-law. Well, they are birds, aren't they? Some people don't like that term, that expression, birds. Girls and women are birds. Some people just don't like that at all, but it's a very old term. What are they in Australia? Do you call them Sheilas, don't you? In America, you call ladies dames, I think. Is it dames? And here they're birds or chicks. Anyway, I mustn't offend all my lady listeners because I know I do have a lot. Well, I'm not offending anyone. I'm just saying that what they're known as in various countries. Same with men. They're known as blokes, chaps, dudes. Dude, that's a funny one, isn't it? All sorts of names for people. No one means any offence or anything to anyone. As Bob says, more Trish and Diane. Well, hopefully that's coming soon, Bob. Nice to hear from you. Oh, that reminds me, send in your questions for Diane, any nursing or medical questions about the old days when they used to give someone a bottle of scotch, hit them over the head with a stick to knock them out and saw off their leg with a rusty hacksaw. Actually, no, I don't think Diane was in nursing back in those days. That's like 200 years ago, isn't it? When was that? You see pictures, don't you, drawings of someone that's been hit over the head and bottle of scotch or whatever, and is unconscious while he saw off his leg. Goodness me, awful days. And some of the dentists' equipment back then, when I first went to the dentist, I remember this, I was about 5 years old. Why I was at the dentist, I don't know at that age. But he had this awful drill, this string-driven drill thing. It was dreadful. I remember coming out of the dentist, I was put into a pushchair, and I had this sort of bib thing on the front, like a towel on the front. There's all blood pouring out of my mouth and soaking into this thing while I'm being wheeled home. No wonder I had a fear of dentists. I don't now. All I have now is a fear of their bill. Oh, Ray, yes, come in, come in. I could do it about $3,000. Happy days. I want to tell you a story. Well, it's not really a story. When I worked in the marine electronics company doing the ship-to-shore radio and all that stuff, there was a chap there. He didn't like anyone. And he took a disliking to me. I don't know why. Well, he didn't like anyone. But it seemed to be me in particular for some odd, unknown reason. He bought in a ship's transmitter. It was an emergency little transmitter. Basically, it's on all the time. If there's any problem, then a passenger, or not a passenger, anyone that's not crew, could hit the button and it would send out the distress signal. He brought it into the workshop, put it on the shelf. He said, don't bother to touch that one. He said, I've just told the bloke we'd have a look at it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's fine. Just leave it. I said, OK. What's his name? Was it John? Can't remember. I said, OK, that's fine. About a week later, he took it away in the end, a few days later. About a week later, I heard him telling my immediate boss, he was an idiot. They're all idiots. He said, I took that into the workshop, told Ray about it. He hasn't even touched it. He hasn't looked at it. He hasn't checked it. He hasn't done anything to it. And this boss of mine, he came in to me and he said, Ray, that little transmitter, why didn't you look at it? And I said, well, he told me not to bother it. I don't know what it was all about. He said, anyway, he didn't believe me. He said, you can't just not look at stuff that comes into the workshop. And this bloke was smirking because he was loitering and lurking behind my boss. I hated the place anyway. It was rubbish. So I saw him smirking. I thought, OK, yeah, I'm not going to say anything. I'll get my own back. A couple of weeks later, he came into the workshop. He asked me how I was getting on with something of his that was a repair job for one of his people. He worked, I don't know where he worked, but they had various areas. I think he was Essex or something. And there was this sort of ship's radio thing. And I said, I don't know whether it's 12 volts or 24 volts. I'm not sure. I was sure it was 12 volts. I knew that. He said, it's 24. I knew he'd say that. I won't go into the reasons why, but he said, it's 24 volts, that one. I said, well, I'm not sure. I'll try it. He said, I'll plug it in. I'll show you. He connected it to 24 volts just as the boss came in. And of course, it went up in smoke. It's got double the voltage on it. And there's smoke coming out of the thing. And do you know what he said to the boss? He said, Ray told me it was 24 volts. And luckily, the boss had been outside the door. He said, no, I heard him tell you it was 12. You said it was 24. He got the push in the end. They got rid of him because he was always causing trouble. But I thought that was rather good. And while he was getting, then he said the B word then, told off. Told off. I was behind the boss and I was smirking. It was my turn. I mean, I don't normally play silly games like that, but he was then he said another word then beginning with A. I'm not prone to swearing, but sometimes these words come to mind, especially as I've been watching some of the series, some of the episodes of Bottom with Rick Mail and Ade Edmondson. Talking rubbish. Anyway, it's all good fun, isn't it? It's all clean fun, one of my friends used to say in the workshop in the 60s. It's all good, clean fun, even though it wasn't. I'll tell you what Trish and I were doing at 7:30 this morning, moving 2 big heavy sofas out of our lounge They won't fit through the front door because we've had a sliding door fitted and the gap's about 3 inches, you know. Good job I'm slim. Well, I think it's 20 something inches. So we've had to take them into the hall, into the dining room, out of the patio doors, onto the patio. They're under the roof, so, it is raining. It started to rain again because we're getting a new sofa, armchair and a poof. What's the correct pronunciation? Is it a poufet? You know, a footstool, not a stool. It's not a stool. I think you can sit on it or put your feet on it. I just call it a poof. The thing is, the reason we've done this, we've got this turning up this afternoon and they're going to take the old ones away. Well, they might do. They said, we don't know. They might resell them because they sell second-hand furniture, you see. And I know what some of these removal people are like. Oh, can't get that through there. Oh, dear, no, we can't do it. I'm going to have to charge you extra for that. Oh, dear. Oh, I didn't realise it was that big. I didn't realise that. Oh, there's a problem there. I have to charge you double. So I thought what we'd do, Trish helped me, of course. We stuck them out on the patio. They can go straight out of the back gate, up the alley to their van. So there's no sucking air in through teeth, no humming and ahhing. Oh, dear. Oh, there's a problem. We need more money. So anyway, we did that this morning. So the lounge is now empty, completely empty. And if they can't get the new one in through the sliding, it's a porch door. We had the outer porch door replaced. And it's a sliding door with a very narrow gap. If they can't get it through there, straight down the alley, in the dining room, in the hall, in the lounge. There we are. That'll be all right. I shall tell them, get on with it. I shall give them a tip, of course. Always give people a tip. They delivered our washing machine, a couple of lads. We gave them a tenner. Well, why not? You know, they probably don't get paid much, so nice to give them a tip. Did I mention I've been given a tape recorder, a Tandberg 3000X from the early 70s. Lovely tape recorder. I'm having to do a lot of work to it. It's a funny thing about model numbers, isn't it? 3000X. What was Harry Potter's broom, his broomstick thing? Nimbus 2000, was it? Things have to be in the thousands with an X or a GT or something. I don't know, it's rather strange. Anyway, my Tandberg 3000X, not my Nimbus 2000 broomstick, is now up and running. And I was given a load of tapes. I've got about 50 tapes, reel-to-reel tapes this is. I've got the machine working. I won't bore you with all that, but I've been listening to some of the tapes. Now, here's something from 1973. This is Tony Blackburn in 73.
10 weeks in the charts, got to number 1 in 1969. In fact, in February of 1969. Where Do You Go to My Lovely Peter Sarsted stands at 32 in our top 100 most requested Revive 45. So if you have just joined us, you're listening to
The Tony Blackburn Show. Stay with the fun. Whoopee! Hear all the hits.
loads of fun and, of course, loads of that wonderful, wonderful music. Let's go back, let me see, 3 years. This was in the charts 14 weeks. Got to number 1, not surprisingly, one of my favorite all-time smash hit records. George Harrison, My Sweet Lord. This is the one you put at number 31.
I didn't like Radio 1 myself. That was BBC Radio 1, Tony Blackburn, 1973. I've got a lot of recordings, as I say, 50-odd tapes. A lot of them I had already, but I was also given a lot with the tape recorder. Thanks, Cliff, if you're listening. Most appreciated. I've only been through a few of the tapes so far. Apparently, on some of them, there's Alan Freeman from, I don't know when, late 60s even, early 70s, with Pick of the Pops. Who remembers Pick of the Pops on BBC Radio 2? VHF, FM, stereo. Stone the Crows, stereo. Happy days indeed. Those were the days when everyone sat at home with their tape recorder ready, their finger on the record button. As soon as their favourite record came on, that's it, click, record it. I did that. Was it, I think I mentioned all this before, haven't I? I don't know what I'm talking about half the time. I think it was Sunday afternoon, 5 to 7 in the evening. Yes, 5 p.m. to 7. Alan Freeman, Fluff they called him, I don't know why. And he played all the top 40, basically. So whatever record you wanted, you could just record it. Or, as these recordings here I found, some artists recorded entire programmes rather than just whatever records they want. So that's rather good. So the Tony Blackburn show, I wonder how many people have got a genuine 1970s, early 70s recording of Tony Blackburn. I might have to transfer that from the tape to my computer. and then perhaps play them on my own pirate radio station. Oh, what am I saying? Good grief. That's illegal, isn't it? Stone the crows. As I said, I was never really into BBC Radio 1. It started in 1967, was it, Radio 1? And they played, oh dear, what was the first record Tony Blackburn ever played? I always forget this. Watching the rain grow, or Flowers in the Rain, something like that. Woke up one morning half asleep, you know the one. I was never really into it. It wasn't Tony Blackburn's fault. When he was on the pirate ships, he was fantastic. Well, he's fantastic on BBC Radio 1, but he was restricted. The BBC had their set of rules, their regulations. You can't do this, you mustn't do that. You must do this. Don't dare do that. You can't say this, you must say that. It was ridiculous. A friend of mine had a copy of the rule book. I didn't see it, but he was telling me a lot of the things that were in this book. It's crazy, whereas on the pirate ships, not that he did anything wrong. Well, it was illegal, I suppose, but he didn't swear. I mean, obviously, you're not allowed to swear if you're a DJ. He didn't do anything political. He did it all correctly on the pirate ships, but of course with the BBC it was even more restricted. And the music they played, can't play this, you can't play that. It was all restricted because of what they called needle time. You could only have so many hours a day of actually playing records because they couldn't afford it. Apparently, allegedly, they had to pay copyright and all that. Anyway, that's all another thing. Tony Blackburn did an excellent job on Radio 1. I would never knock him as a DJ, even though it's not my sort of thing. But he did an excellent job considering the restrictions he was under or being controlled by. You know, it was crazy. But he did his best. And millions of people loved him. He's still going now, isn't he, Tony Blackburn? I think he's on BBC Radio 2. Is it Sundays? I don't know. I don't listen to the radio. I just I listen to illegal pirate radio stations and music on my computer, records, and now, of course, my tape recorder. Won't bang on about Tony Blackburn anymore, but one restriction was because they couldn't play records, he'd say, right, here's the latest one from the Beatles. She Wants to Hold Your Hand, or whatever it was called. And you're thinking, oh, this is good, the Beatles, the number one from the Beatles. He would then say, played by the NDO, the Northern Dance Orchestra. Stone the crows, you can't have the NDO playing I Want to Hold Your Hand by the Beatles. The NDO, I think, was the BBC's orchestra, Northern, I don't know. It was dreadful, and I think he felt embarrassed. He must have felt embarrassed. I'm going to play you the number one this week from the Beatles by some daft dance orchestra. Anyway, right, that's enough of all that. I shall be playing my tape recorder later. When I finish talking to you, I'm going to have a rave. Happy days. I seem to be lurching from one subject to another. Here we go, back now to Dr. Beeching. I just had a look to see online what it was all about. He called for the closure of 1/3 of the country's 7,000 railway stations. What's a third of 7,000? I don't know. That's a lot, isn't it? Passenger services would be withdrawn from around 5,000 route miles, accounting for an annual train mileage of 68 million and yielding, according to Beeching, a net saving of 18 million a year. That's a lot of money, 18 million pounds a year. Was it 66 or 67? I can't remember what I said now. That was a lot of money then. A third of 7,000 railway stations closed. That's not good, is it? It's a shame. But his job was to save the railway money, which he did. So whichever way you look at it. It's a shame anyway. As I said, it's all those little branch lines closed, and the majority of them never to be opened again. Off on another lurch now. I've been looking online, Twitter, X, whatever it's called, and I've been finding a lot of photos from the late 1800s through the sort of 1920, 1930, 40. It's brilliant looking back at the old black and white photos from that time. And what I've noticed, there's a lot of photos of a street, for example, and the old houses, and children playing in the streets. The kids are wearing dirty, old, scruffy clothes, obviously torn and holes in them. You can see that clearly in the photos. But they all look happy. They're playing in the streets. Some of them are from the old slum areas. But even those kids, they're really dirty. They've got bare feet and they're out in the road, in puddles and mucking around on bits of wasteland. But they look happy. I just love looking at the old photos. It just makes me think of how bad things were for some people back then in the slums. They just didn't have any money. They didn't have any luxury goods or anything. They just survived, I suppose. There was one photo in particular I saw, an old Volkswagen Beetle. Do you remember those cars, the Volkswagen Beetle? There was one, it must have been 60s, I suppose. It was sort of in a field and it was trashed. And there were kids climbing all over it, climbing in it, having a whale of a time, terrific time. And there's other photos of kids, they tie a bit of rope to a lamppost, somewhere high up the lamppost, and then swing round on this rope like a maypole. They're climbing on brick walls, they're doing all sorts of dangerous things on old bomb sites, of course, from the war years. Highly dangerous stuff. No health and safety. They go home absolutely filthy. Their clothes are already ripped when they went out. When they get home, they're even more ripped and shreds hanging off them. But I suppose they had something to eat, whatever it was their mum was able to cook for them. Unhappy days in many ways, but they looked happy. I remember when I was young, we found an old car dumped somewhere. It had been stripped of various things, but the speedometer was still there on the dashboard. I wanted the speedometer. I ran home, I got some tools out of my dad's shed, and I managed to remove the speedo from the dashboard. In those days, you could get behind it, and you undid a knurled nut sort of thing, undid the cable, because they were cable-driven from the gearbox. Won't bore you with all that again, but it wasn't electronic like these days. And I got the speedo out. I cut the wire, there's a little bulb in there, 2 bulbs in there for lighting up at night, like the dash bulbs, you know. I took the thing home and I stuck my dad's electric drill in the back of it. I made up a little thing, stuck it in the back, wound it up to 90 miles an hour or something. I thought that was terrific, watching the mileometer go up. And of course what I did in the end, you know, me being me, I had to look inside. What makes this tick? How does it work? So I took it all to bits. And I discovered that there was this aluminium thing that whizzed round and there were magnets in there. And my dad explained when he got in, I got it in bits, and I said, look, how does this work? Because that bit goes round, but it's not connected to anything. Ah, yes, he said, yes, it is. Magnetic fields, electric currents, blah, 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 all this stuff. Anyway, it was great fun. That's how you learn, isn't it? As children, that's how I learned. That's how we all learned. You know, we go and find a scrap car, pull it to bits, look at the engine, pull bits off and find out what they are, what they do, take bits home. Of course, you go home covered in oil and filthy, get told off. Oh, you've ripped your new jeans. Get told off for that. Happy days. It's obviously not the safest thing to do for children to be clambering all over a dumped car and pulling it to bits. But what do kids have these days in the way of learning about mechanical things? What do? They go over the park and sit there, muck it under his swore then, and sit there playing with their mobile phone. Or if they're young and they haven't got a mobile phone, they probably don't go to the park because that's a bit dangerous in itself these days. So they don't learn anything. You know, I built a bike, built my own bicycle out of bits from the dump. So when you get older in years, you get your own house, you got your own car, you get married, you have kids, you can do a lot of the work yourself on the house. You can do bits and pieces to your car. You can repair the kids' bicycles, teach them how to do things. But it's all lost now, of course. Well, not all of it, but most of it is lost, isn't it? It's all gone. I bought some netting, plastic netting, for the garden the other day. This is for sweet peas to grow up. Anyway, I looked on the packet, made in China. Everything is made. Can't we make a bit of plastic netting? It's come all the way, how many thousands of miles is China, in a container, on a big ship pumping out diesel fumes, for a bit of plastic netting. I wonder, do we make anything in Britain anymore? Anything at all? You go to the supermarket and buy some carrots and it says Spain or Egypt. Runner beans come from Morocco or wherever it is. It's not funny, really. It's dreadful. We had a brilliant industry, motorbikes we made, didn't we? Because then the Japanese nicked all our designs and ideas, built their own. I was going to say better and cheaper, not better, but cheaper. I don't know why I've digressed to Chinese and Japanese manufacturers, but I just sort of drifted off on a tangent there. Look at that weather. It's dull again today. I got really brown in the garden the other day. Now it's dull again. Apparently a little bit of sunshine this afternoon. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, or will be in the eating. Now, what did I hear the other day? I heard a line which I rather liked. Oh, yes, someone was talking about a beautiful girl. This was on the telly. And she wasn't allowed out. Her parents wouldn't allow her out because she was really pretty and beautiful. They wanted to look after her. And someone said one of the lines was, "You can't keep a butterfly in a jar." I rather like that. That's quite meaningful, isn't it? Do you like that? Okay. I just thought I'd mention that. Let's move on. Just talking to a friend of mine on the radio, and he's a bit sad. I said, "Well, what happened? What's the matter?" He's into model boats and, radio-controlled boats. And he goes over to this little lake place, a pond, and his boat, it went to the bottom of the pond. He said it was just like the Titanic. One end slipped up. The battery, apparently, in the boat came loose. It's quite heavy. Went to the bow end, was it, or the stern, or wherever it went. And the thing went down, glug, 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 and disappeared. I said, "Well, it's only a pond. Can't you go and get it?" He said, "That's 12 foot deep. And there's a lot of mud at the bottom. So you couldn't really wade out there." Or I said, "Well, your wetsuit?" No, I can't do that. He reckons it's just spent 100 quid on this boat. And he reckons there's other boats down there as well. So I suggested draining the pond. It's at the back of a pub. I don't know whether you know the Swiss Cottage in Shoreham. There's this lake. Well, it's not a lake, it's a pond. I think they could pump it out into the River Ada, which is just over the road from the pub, literally across the road. Anyway, there we are. I said you'll have to take up submarining. And he said that he did have a submarine, a model submarine. And apparently that goes down to the bottom and comes up again. I don't know how that's radio controlled, if it's 12 feet down. Anyway, that's another story altogether. And I mentioned podcasts to him because he talks a lot. Bless him, he does talk non-stop. You think I talk a lot. Think Tricia talks a lot. It's truth. He is non-stop. He'll tell you where he's been. We went to so-and-so. We bought this and we bought that. Then we came back to the car park. On and on and on. I said to him, you could do a 12-hour non-stop podcast every week. What he said was he'd like to come over and do one with me, like I did Nurse Diane. I could sit him here. The trouble is I wouldn't get a word in. But we might look at doing that. He could talk about model boats because he's been making them since the 60s. He's about my age. So I'll warn you when that one comes out, then you can all skip that one. Don't bother with that. Give it a miss. Another chap was also on the radio. 3 of us were having a chat. And he was saying, I mentioned the Tony Blackburn tapes that I've just been playing. And he was saying that a lot of people like reminiscing and they like listening to people reminiscing, as I do, You love listening to me, don't you? Now, don't say no. Don't turn off. Everyone's switched off now. No, seriously, it is interesting. I remember when I was in my teens, late teens, early 20s, in the pub. I wasn't always with the men of my age, the lads of my age, looking at girls and drinking too much. I sometimes would go and sit with an old boy, because we knew them to say hello to. You get 1 or 2 old boys in there. And they were really interesting. They talk about the war years, what they did during the war and their experiences. Some of them wouldn't. Some of them, if they'd had a bad experience in the war, they were with a bunch of their mates and they were the only survivor. They wouldn't talk about that. They didn't want to know. But a lot of other interesting things they would talk about from the war years. And I found it fascinating, not only the war, but other times before I existed, going back to the 30s or whenever. It was interesting to listen to them. And this is what this other chap on the radio was saying, that anything like talking about the old Tony Blackburn shows, he said, because we can relate. He's about the same age as me. He remembers Blackburn on the radio in the 60s and 70s. And of course, he is still on the radio now. But what I'm going to do is, once I get the tape recordings onto the computer, I'll put them on a memory stick thing, and then he can put it onto his computer and he can listen to the Tony Blackburn show from 1960 or 70, whatever. It's all good, clean fun, isn't it? Do you remember Arnold, the dog? Tony Blackburn had a dog called Arnold, and it would go, roof, roof. I have to do that with a little echo, put an echo on that. Do you remember John Noakes on Blue Peter? He had a dog called Shep, and he was forever saying, get down, Shep, because the dog kept jumping up. And of course, I've got my seagulls, haven't I, at the beginning of the Sunday episode. And that chiming clock, I don't know why I've got a chiming clock on the midweek message. It's that time again. It's just different, I suppose, isn't it? It's just something different. I made a little video of my tape recorder and I played a brief bit of Tony Blackburn. And someone's put, nice of you to play a short blast of the Tony Blackburn show. He goes on to say, those were the magic days of pop radio and far more entertaining than today's rubbish. I think I'm not alone. Well, I know I'm not alone in thinking that way. Today's radio is rubbish. I don't think anyone listens to it anyway. And as I've said before, the BBC, they got rid of Ken Bruce and his pop quiz thing. He is now on Greatest Hits Radio. Simon Mayo, he's gone. The BBC seem to get rid of the decent DJs and, well, entertainers, aren't they? They're not just DJs. And they wonder why their sort of listening figures are going down. I've had a lot of comments on the video that I put on. If you go to G4NSJ, Golf 4 November Sierra Juliet, .co.uk, go to that. That's a web page. What will you find there? Oh yes, then go to the main menu. It's all my amateur radio stuff, and you'll see down there under audio or something is all about the tape recorder. Hello, news flash, danger, Will Robinson. That's a rubbish news flash. We've got polling today. You know, they're going for local councils, is it local MPs or whatever they're doing? You go and vote. And I saw on telly this morning, one of the candidates, this chap, the Monster Raving Loony Party. Wasn't that started by Screaming Lord Such? Anyway, this chap, there he was with his rosette thing, the Monster Screaming whatever it is, Loony Party. I think on his badge thing it said the Loony President or whatever. I don't know, President of the Loony Party. It's funny. Again, it's a bit of a laugh. I think they have to pay £1,000 deposit. It may be more now, but I suppose they club together and pay the £1,000 and it's just a bit of fun. Screaming Lord Such, he had his own radio station, didn't he? That didn't last very long, apparently. From what I've heard, people didn't like what he played. I think he played the records he liked and no one else liked. It's rather like me inflicting my taste in music on everyone else. You can't do that. People don't all like it. Some do, some don't. It's rather nice to know that we're all different. I remember a chap in the workshop back in the 60s, in the old days. Whatever you asked him, whatever anyone asked him, his answer was the same. Who wants to know? What are you doing tonight, Derek? Are you going to the pub? Who wants to know? And his other favourite was Wind Your Neck In. He wouldn't tell anyone anything. He was that secretive. This is the one I told you about recently that hid his car, his Ford Zodiac car, around the corner and carried his crash helmet into work. So people thought he had his scooter, his Lambretta scooter with him. That way he wouldn't be asked by the boss to go out and do TV repairs. Can't turn up on your scooter with a toolbox. And he was very secretive. I didn't know he had a Ford Zodiac. My favourite car back in the day. Always wanted one. I didn't know till he gave me a lift home one evening. I said, what's this? That's my car. I didn't even know he had a driving licence. I didn't know he'd passed his test. He was a funny chap. Are you listening, Derek? Are you still around, I wonder? If so, get in touch. Raise Rants at protonmail.com. Anyone, get in touch. Be lovely to hear from you all. Anyone remember Mary Hopkin from the old days? She was born in 1950. Apparently it's her birthday today. There we are, 1950. I was born in 51, so that makes her 74. Those were the days, my friend, we thought they'd never end. Do you remember that? I think she was a friend of Paul McCartney's. Is that right? Can't remember. Then we had Engelbert Humperdinck. Obviously not his real name. Engelbert Humperdinck. What a strange name. All the old music. I'm going on about that because I've just taken a little coffee break and I've been listening to some of my tapes and all the fantastic music from the old days. Something that's just come to mind. Have you ever been to an auction? I used to go to a lot of auctions. Trish did as well. But in my early days, before I met Trish, I'd go on my own to an auction in the town. And they had all sorts of stuff there. A lot of junk, of course, but a lot of good stuff. And I picked up all sorts of bits and pieces from there. I bought a bureau, you know, a writing type bureau. I think it was 3 drawers. The top comes down and then inside the bureau you've got little drawers and cubby holes and things. And I wanted one of those for my paperwork. So I got this thing for something like a £5. I can't remember how much it was. No one else wanted it. And I got it for a £5. Put it in the back of my car. I had an estate car then. You call them station wagons, don't you, in America, an estate car? Anyway, that's another issue again altogether. Well, leave that for another day. I do like American cars, though, as you know. So I took this thing home, and after a few months, I didn't really want it. It wasn't sort of fitting in the room properly. It didn't look right. So I thought I'd just stuff it back in the auction. I took it back down there. And as I said, I think I paid a fiver for it. Went for £25. And that got me thinking. I should buy and sell things and get into auctioning and stuff like that. I didn't know, because you can't do everything, can you? It's like eBay and other auction sites online. I know some people, they make a lot of money. Well, that is their job. That is their sort of employment, isn't it, if you like? That is what they do, how they make their living, by buying and selling online. And you really need time to do that. You can't just do it part-time evenings and weekends, not if you're going to go into it properly. There was someone I knew that he bought stuff from the MOD, Ministry of Defence. He bought bulk stuff from them, even a jet engine for an aircraft. He had to take stuff like the jet engine because he had to, his agreement was he would take whatever they had. He would buy the bulk shipment and just take the lot. He wanted 10 grand for the jet engine. I don't know whether he ever sold it. He had that in his place. I went to see it. Fantastic. He got all this stuff from the MOD and he spent, full time putting stuff on eBay. And he made really good money. But the work, he had a huge warehouse full of this stuff. And the work, he had a packing department. It was only him. You'd think when he walked in there, you'd think he had staff. He only went to the post office with all his stuff one day a week, I think, or Thursday, because he couldn't keep popping out to the post office every day. But he did really well. He did very, very well. I bought some bits from him, radio bits. And it's the same, some of these programs. Is it Flog It on the TV? Flog It and Antiques Roadshow. People go to a car boot sale or a garage sale and buy some sort of bits and pieces for a few pounds. Then they find that it's worth hundreds of pounds. Doesn't happen very often. You have to know what you're looking for. Trish and I have been round the boot sales looking at things, and you see an ornament, £25. What? 25? I wouldn't have that if you paid me. I'd just take it up the tip. I put it in the bin. So you have to know what you're doing, and I don't, obviously. But you can make some money. A friend of mine bought a clock many years ago. This is going back to the 60s. He bought a grandmother clock. You've got the big grandfather clock. The grandmother clock hangs on the wall. And he bought that and he made, I don't know what it was, I can't remember what he made, but he made several weeks' wages just by buying and selling this one little clock. And of course that again, everyone in the workshop, we could do that, we could buy and sell. But you can't, you've got to know what you're doing. We've now got black clouds coming down over the downs here from the north, coming towards me. I'm looking at them as they move slowly towards me. It's supposed to be sunny this afternoon, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Yesterday, I pressure washed the patio area because we had to move all the patio furniture out of the way to get these big sofa things in and out because they wouldn't fit through the front door. So I thought I'll take the opportunity to get the pressure washer out, which I did. And it really looks nice. All the slabs, the paving stones, what are they? Flagstones, whatever they're called. They look lovely. They look like new because we had the patio done 3 or 4 years ago. And they got very dirty over the years. So it all looks like new now. And I was hoping this afternoon for the sunshine so we could sit out there, perhaps have our lunch out there. But no, dreadful wind from the west, black clouds coming across. We had summer. I shouldn't complain. We had summer the other day, didn't we? I was talking to my son in North Carolina the other day. Well, I wasn't in North Carolina. He was. We chatted online. Imagine if I had to phone him or he phoned me. In the old days, £5 a minute. Mental. And he was saying, interesting question, do you ever wonder where your bits and pieces are these days that you sold years ago? For example, you might have sold a radio years ago. Do you wonder where it is now? Is it still around? Has it gone to the tip? If it's worth something like an antique clock, a grandmother clock, as I've just been talking about, you sold that perhaps 50 years ago. Do you ever wonder where it is now? That's interesting, actually. We had a bit of a chat about that because I've sold over the years a lot of radio equipment, amateur radio gear, ham radio gear. I sold something back in the 70s and I wish I'd kept it. And I wonder where that is now. It got me thinking. Someone wouldn't have thrown it away. It's a nice piece of kit. And now it's vintage. It's worth some money. I sold that for £200 back in, goodness me, 1970 something I sold it. And they're quite rare these days. You don't see many of them for sale. Is it in someone's house? Is someone still using it? Is it in a museum somewhere? It's just an interesting question that he put to me. It's got me thinking. You probably remember, if you're an old listener, no, I don't mean whether if you're old, if you're a listener of long-standing listener, that's what I mean. If you're a long-standing listener to the podcast, you might remember my talking about relationships. Do you ever wonder where that girl or boy is now, what they're doing, that you went out with in 19 or whatever, 60 something or other? I know some of you are young, so you won't be thinking that. You weren't there in 1960 something or other. Someone you went out with, someone possibly you were engaged to at the time. Where are they now? Did they go on to get married to someone, and did they have children? Where are they? Did they emigrate abroad somewhere? It's interesting, isn't it? I've said before now, haven't I? If any of my old girlfriends are listening, get in touch. No one has. Probably just as well, actually. What's that expression, that saying? Let sleeping dogs lie. Good point, yes, good advice. I'm going to take a break now and have a cup of coffee or maybe a cup of tea. We're tea drinkers, aren't we, us British? We're tea drinkers. And I'm going to play some of my tapes. If I find anything interesting, I'll put it on the podcast episode and let you hear it. I can't play music to you. Thank goodness for that, you're saying, because of copyright, you know. I'll get told off, oh, you can't do that, you can't play music. So I'll just, if I find any snippets of DJing or whatever, I'll let you hear it. I'm back again. I've just been looking online at the Rolling Stones. They're in America, aren't they? I forget where they are now exactly. New Orleans. Mick Jagger's 80. And Keith Richards, how old is he? 100 and what? Look at the way Mick Jagger dances around on the stage. I don't know. I'm 73. I have a job to get upstairs. I couldn't do that. He is very fit, isn't he? Mind you, he's slim as well. But who's into the Rolling Stones? Anyone? I always have been. Back in the 60s, of course, it was the Beatles or the Stones, one or the other, and I chose the Stones. Marianne Faithfull, of course, was my pin-up girl. She was lovely. She still is, actually. She's aged a little, as have we all, of course. Now, what was I going to say? Have you been up to anything interesting? Email me, rants@protonmail.com. What have you been doing? I've been mowing the lawn, moving furniture about, cleaning the car. Well, Trish and I did that, ready for the Isle of Wight trip. A lot of gardening. What have you been up to? Painting and decorating. Do you do that yourself? I've got to clean the windows, actually. Do you have a window cleaner? What have you been doing? How do you keep yourself busy? Mind you, a lot of you, of course, are at work, aren't you? You're at work full time. But those of you who have retired, what do you do all the time? My brother-in-law and my sister, they've taken up bowls, not the bowling alley type, 9-pin. What is it, 9-pin or 10-pin? Oh, I don't know, 9.5-pin bowling, whatever they call it. I used to play that years ago. It was quite good fun. But they've taken up bowls, on the bowling green. Actually, what's that? There's noises going on everywhere now. And they love it. The only trouble is with that, I would like to play that game, but the only trouble is the bending down, when you actually bowl the ball along the grass to hit the jack. It's the bending down bit. We went to our club yesterday. It's now Saturday and it's a beautiful day. Went to our club and they've got a bar billiard table there, which is fairly new. They've had the pool tables there for ages, of course, and they've got a decent snooker table. But the bar billiard table, I used to be in the bar billiard team at a pub. It was called the Norfolk Arms or something in my hometown. And I was in the team there. It was great. But again, as with the bowling, it means, when you're queuing up and firing the ball, you've got to bend down. I don't think I could do it because of my back, which is very unfortunate because I used to love bar billiards and I wouldn't mind having a go at the bowls. I don't know. There we are. Old age doesn't stop me from doing most things, though, I have to say. So what have you been up to? What do you do when in your spare time? Hobbies have you got? Any radio amateurs out there? Licensed radio hams? Any pirate radio station operators? Tell me when and where to listen and I will be there. Just looking out of the window again. I hope this weather keeps up. It's lovely. It's cold in here. It's warmer outside than it is in the house. So we've opened all the doors, try and let some warmth in. I'm going to end it here. I know it's a little bit short. Where are we? 3/4 of an hour. But looking out there at the blue sky, the sunshine, a slight breeze, I'm going to put my shorts on and frighten the neighbours. That'll teach them. They'll all be drawing their curtains, slamming their windows shut. No, they won't. I'm not that bad. My legs aren't bad, actually. You don't want to know about my legs, do you? Right, I think that's it. I'm going to also have a look at my tape recorder later. That takes me back to the 60s, you know. Everyone had a tape recorder. I know I've said this before, but it was fantastic. Everyone had a tape recorder, and we'd record sometimes tape to tape. If someone had some music or whatever it was, a radio play, for example, I used to record radio plays. Then I could listen to them whenever I liked. Of course, these days you can listen to what you like, when you like, anyway, without tape recorders. But it was great fun recording radio plays and then having a listen to it whenever you felt like it, rather than being stuck to the sort of timetable of the radio station. So I'm going to have a play around with that later. I will see you on Wednesday, of course, with the midweek message. Let's hope the weather's good. Hope it's good where you are. Don't forget, tell me what you've been up to, hobbies, things like that. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? I've done one on hobbies, haven't I? Years ago, I remember doing a podcast episode about various hobbies, train sets and building model boats and model aircraft. So, yes, let me know. Raise rants at protonmail.com. Oh, I nearly forgot. Neil. Hello, Neil. He says, what was everyone's first car? That'd be interesting. Mine was a 1954 Hillman Minx. So, everyone, what was your first car? And don't forget, we need some questions for Nurse Diane, part 2. So that'll be interesting. I've already got some questions that have been sent in, so thank you for those. So send in some more nursing questions. And yeah, Neil wants to know what your first car was. Behave yourself, be good, be bad, don't get caught. See you on Wednesday. Bye-bye for now.